Okay. Thanks. Look, there is so much I could talk about today. So I'm probably going to talk really fast for the next 20 minutes or so. What I really wanted to do was have a really quick look at some of the behaviour change psychology that's behind the things that you see and that you hear about, and to give a few examples of the things that I've been involved with that have seen these campaigns in action and get different people involved in different programs. Very quickly, my background, and this is, I'm not going to, in what I'm talking about, going to cover all of this today, but I thought that when it comes to questions and answers, I thought if I give you a sense of the kind of things I've worked on, then you might have questions that are pertinent to some other things that I don't talk about. But I spent 7 years at Planet Ark Environmental Foundation, so I was involved in setting up the Cartridges for Planet Ark program. I did the media side for National Tree Day. I managed National Recycling Week. I've got a picture in there that I thought I'd include of Woofer and Scott West from the Western Bulldogs, just as an example of the kind of things that we did for National Tree Day. We knew that it was really easy to get women interested in the environment. How do we get blokes? How do we get footy-loving, beer-drinking blokes interested in the environment? Footy. So we got Western Bulldogs involved in National Tree Day several years ago. But the thing that I'm going to talk about mainly today is the plastic bag reduction campaign, which might have been either the success or the bane of existence for a certain Minister of Waits at the time. Slight smile on his face. Then I was also on the board of Sustainability Victoria, so I have a different perspective on that initiative too. And also very much an interest in how, as a state, are we going to reduce the waste we're sending to landfill and reduce that wasted opportunity, because these are resources that you can keep in the materials economy and that you can get better use out of, and at the same time reduce emissions, reduce water consumption, that sort of thing. More recently, I've been involved in National Science Week and been doing some science engagement, so not just in environment and sustainability, but broader areas. And I now manage the publicity for National Science Week. And as part of that, we did the media, or part of that and separate to it, we did the media for the Wildlife Spotter program. Has anyone heard of Wildlife Spotter? Gee, it was gorgeous, it was fun. It was a great little citizen science project that happened last August, and that's going to be another case study that I look at today. But also because one of the suggested topics that you guys might want to hear about is citizen science and what's the potential for that. I think it's enormous and untapped, and certainly from the people that I've spoken to in the research community, in the scientific and academic university sector, they feel that there's actually a lot of untapped potential in government, in data. There is science in government that is not reaching academia and flowing into journal papers, and I'd like to see more of that happening because there is so much knowledge that we could be sharing. Finally, I thought I'd just mention as well that that a lot of my career was spent in the media. So I was a reporter for ABC's Catalyst program. I did a story on citizen science for that. I was a writer for G Magazine and did a lot of freelance writing about environmental topics and green living and wrote lots of books, but I'm not going to talk about a lot of that today because you're going to hear from people who have worked their entire careers in media. You'll hear from John Fain and you'll hear from a social media specialist later. And I think it's more important that they tell you that perspective because, you know, like I'm an environmentalist at heart, so if you were pitching a story to me, you'd already have me on side. I think it's really good for you to channel those questions to the people that you've got to work harder to convince. Me, I'm a pushover, I'm an easy sell. It's like, you know, charismatic megafauna, I'm there. Saving water and energy, yep, I'm there doing that story. Okay. So the first thing, this builds on something that John said earlier, is that, you know, facts don't change people's minds. Facts don't move people. I spent the first part of my career working on what we call the information deficit model of behaviour change. If you give people more information, they will act rationally and exhibit the behaviour you want them to. Doesn't work. And I wrote several books that are around about 90,000 words each before I realised that they probably weren't going to change behaviour as much as I thought they might. But hey, I was young and idealistic. And look, one thing that I did want to explain is this idea in psychology circles of dual process models. Another name for it is the rational versus the experiential self. And basically, all of us in our minds have two different processing systems. So there's the rational self, it's the higher brain thinking. It's that, here's this information, I process it. The weather today is unusually warm for this time of year, and it was this time last year. Maybe there's a change in weather patterns, maybe climate changes. It's abstract reasoning. The experiential self is things like, I see a spider or a snake, and instantly there's adrenaline rushing through my body. Before I'm even aware of registering in my mind that, there's a snake or a spider, my body has already reacted into it and is putting me into that fight or flight mode. And so that's kind of the reptile brain side of our thought processes and our functioning. And we all have both of those, and we really need to understand that it's that experiential and emotional side of us that does quick responses and that's very powerful, and we can't just rely on that rational side of people's brains. I've got them represented by Mr. Spock and Captain Kirk. I mentioned this on the science show once, and I got into huge trouble from the Trekkies for referring to him as Dr. Spock. Sorry, Mr. Spock. But the thing that I always say to people is that it's always a good idea to remember that we have both. We have our inner reasoning, Mr. Spock, and our inner Captain Kirk. But you always need to remember who is the captain of the Starship Enterprise. It's Kirk. He's the one with his hands on the steering wheel. But it is really good that he's got Spock whispering in his ear and giving him advice. So when we talk about behaviour change theory, very quickly, this is kind of if you think of a person, what are the factors that influence their behaviour? Are they going to litter that plastic bag? Are they going to go and volunteer in a community clean-up program? Are they going to go and plant trees somewhere? Then there's internal and external factors that are going to influence those choices. So inside the person, there's their values, there's their emotional response to the situation, their prior knowledge, that's that rational self that we appeal to, but also whether or not do they have a sense of responsibility towards that particular thing, and also efficacy, this idea of, do I have an ability to do something about that? A lot of people don't act because they don't feel like they can make a difference. So part of us communicating with people is to give them a sense of what they can do, and that, how easy or hard it is, or different ways to do those things. So if we can enhance that, what we call self-efficacy, then we can get that kind of behaviour happening. But it's not just what's going on inside a person. There are things that are outside of them that influence them as well. So there's the social environment, which we've got there as social norms. So, in my crowd, is it cool to do that kind of thing? Oh, no, they're hippies, all those people who go to clean-ups. Or, no, it's obviously, you participate in community activities. Different people's social groups will have different influences on them. Reinforcement contingencies, that's a big word, big bit of jargon, but that's the kind of things that either reward or punish a behaviour. So if we give people a reward for doing something, like kids doing their chores and getting pocket money, then that might encourage them to do more. That's considered as a way to deposits on drink cans, that might be the logic there. Conversely, a fine for doing the wrong behaviour. So to reinforce the idea that you shouldn't speed, then let's whack people with speeding fines. Also prompts, so the place-based things that tell people what to do. Affordances, they're the things that make it convenient. Like it's much easier to not litter if there's well-placed rubbish bins. So they're the kind of things that are forward that make possible the desired behaviour. So that, keeping in mind that all those things, like you can have something that targets someone's values, but if you're not doing something about the environment that they find themselves in, then you might find that your initiative falls over. So it's a lot to keep in mind, but just remember that we can't look at these things in isolation. So as a little textbook example, I wanted to talk about Planet Ark, and many others were involved in this, the efforts to reduce plastic bag consumption. And I find this particularly interesting because my perspective on this was that I wrote a media release in the middle of the night one night because my boss at the time, a guy called John D, said, hey, in Ireland they've introduced a plastic bag tax and they've cut their plastic bag consumption by 90% in 6 months. I want you to write a media release suggesting that Australia should do the same thing. And this is in 2002, and at the time I said, plastic bags, because I'm quite, like, I love my rational brain, I love numbers, and I like science, and I like evidence, and I'm like, plastic bags, they're 15th of what was into landfill. Why can't we do a campaign on construction and demolition waste? That's a third of the waste that we send to landfill, and it's got all these embodied emissions and blah, 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 blah. Who here has heard people in public talk about the issue of construction and demolition waste? Excellent, good to hear. Look, he was on the money in terms of what would resonate with people, and I'm there with my rational case for wanting to tackle construction and demolition waste, which, as a side point, there are companies that did do that. So Alex Fraser Group, for example, has mobile on-site construction, recycling machinery that they can do stuff and turn it into base, on-site. But anyway, that's a side thing. But I wasn't convinced. But you do what you do when you're charged to by your employer, and I wrote a media release. And the thing that I've always found really fascinating is the intersection between media and public opinion and and how that influences policy. So that media release went out and it went off, and we did a lot of media interviews, and there was a lot of debate. And then some states wanted to ban plastic bags. Some states wanted to introduce a levy. Some states didn't really want to do anything much. There were other issues on the agenda as well at the time. There'd been the decision to ban the bulb, the phase out of the incandescent lamp in favour of compact fluorescent lamps. So what are we going to do with mercury-containing lamps? There was also the coming out, phase out of the analogue signal, which meant that we were going to have this huge waste stream of cathode ray tube and old analogue signal TVs. There were other issues being talked about. And every 6 months or so, the Environment Protection and Heritage Council, which I called the Environment Ministers Club, would get together. So that's state and federal environment ministers, and they talk about areas where they could work on policy together. And I used to call it Groundhog Day because they would have these different things on the agenda, meeting after meeting after meeting, but mostly they wouldn't get to fluorescent lamps or computer recycling because they were spending the entire day, talking about plastic bags and deposits on drink cans. And so why was that? If you ever want evidence that politicians are listening to what the public's interested in, then, and through the media and how it influences it, I did a 6-month story count of media stories in Melbourne of how many stories were there on construction and demolition waste, 47 stories, computer recycling, 51, compact fluorescent lamps, 40 stories, plastic bags, 155, deposits on cans, 173. The reasons for that, with plastic bags, you saw that image earlier of the turtle choking on a plastic bag. It's emotive, it gets to you. When I heard people on Talkback Radio discussing, the deposits on beverage containers, people would say, I remember when I was a lad and I'd take my bottle to the shop and I'd get 20 cents for my bottle and I'd spend it on mixed lollies and it was great. And so I'm there, with my science brain, what's the evidence, what's the evidence? So there was a lot of sentiment and goodwill and emotion in that debate. And so that was involved in that policy process. So getting on to a little bit of behaviour change theory, I wanted to look back at plastic bags through the lens of, now I won't go into this in detail, but this is the values, beliefs and norms theory of behaviour change. And the most important thing that I want you to get out of this diagram is the values on that far side, the left of the screen. People have varying levels, but they have different value sets, and you can't assume that the people that you're communicating with, that you need to influence, are operating from the same values that you are. So the 3 broad values propositions in this model are biospheric, people who put biodiversity as the first and foremost most valuable thing, the thing worth protecting. Then there's the altruistic value set, which is about benefiting other humans, so it's a very people-focused value system. And there's the egoistic mindset, which, what's in it for me? So plastic bags, when we look at that, the reason why that resonated and got so much action was that the heart appealed to people's biospheric values. Even if they might be more altruistic, but if they're a little bit biospheric, then seeing images of animals suffering and the understanding that they could do something about it really motivated people to act. But also, if you go down to the egoistic side, what's in it for me, the threat of not necessarily an actual tax coming in, but the threat of a levy or a tax, that hit to the hip pocket, for someone who is egoistic, then that was something to motivate action. So Bunnings, they actually put in their own voluntary levy, and they were going to donate that money to Keep Australia Beautiful, who had all sorts of plans for how they'd spend the money raised from the Bunnings levy on plastic bags. They barely raised anything because people did change their behaviour rather than spending 15 cents extra on a bag. So the other things to take away from this, the beliefs are an area where we can influence people. We can't necessarily change values. They tend to be lifelong and really hard to shift, but we can change or influence people's and tailor our messaging to appeal to those beliefs, ideas, understandings. So the ideas and beliefs about, are there adverse consequences to valued objects? Is there an adverse consequence to my bank account? Yes. How do I reduce that threat? I bring my bags with me and I don't have to pay for them. Valued object, wildlife, perceived threat, yes. Sense of obligation and ability to take action. Yeah, if I don't litter them or if I encourage my friends not to litter these bags, then they're less likely to be affected. And those things lead to those different kinds of behaviours there. So, and again, there's different sorts of environmental behaviour, and understanding what yours is will also help you understand these things. So what this really shapes up to is the idea of having an understanding of what are you doing, why are you doing it, and how will you get there. What are your projects or organisation's goals? Who is your audience? What are their values? What do you want them to think or do? So it's not just raising awareness. If there's one thing that I can't stand, it's raising awareness without an idea of why you're raising awareness and what that's going to lead to. What are the key messages and what resources can help you to deliver them? So moving on to another little case study, Wildlife Spotter. That was the Citizen Science Project for National Science Week last year. And that put literally thousands of camera trap images taken by researchers onto a really easy to use website, and that was promoted as part of National Science Week. So it wasn't just promoted among environment networks, it was also promoted to everyone who gets involved in Science Week, so kits that are sent out to all schools in Australia through science communication and government science channels, and through ABC's media campaigns as well, so huge broadcasting. The end result was that 50,000 people around Australia made 3.5 million animal identifications from 800,000 images, and there are a whole suite of partner organisations involved there. So just to give you a look at what the portal looks like, you'd get a picture would come up on the screen, and you'd be given a background on what research project that was involved with that you could look at if you wanted to. You could find different things that you could isolate, and identify, and you'd think, oh yep, it has this, and here's some reference images, and oh, that looks like a spinifex pigeon. So you'd click your identification. And for most images, they had 4 people or more also identifying that image. So it was cross-referenced to give it a bit of rigour. So what were the outcomes, the benefits of that? Well, think of it in these terms for the scientific or the field researchers there. The amount of hours spent on the Wildlife Spotter website doing identifications was 29,000 hours, equivalent to one person working a 40-hour week for 15 years. And that data is being fed through not just to the research projects involved, but to the Atlas of Living Australia as well, which is used by, for example, planners in working out, what's the geospatial mapping of these species in this area? Do we need to plan developments to protect them? It gave people an insight into, people didn't know that there were camera traps out there. So it gave the ordinary person an insight into how we do wildlife monitoring and these research methods. And there was huge media coverage. Okay, yes, a bit of awareness raising. But that also helped to humanise scientists and humanise researchers, which I think there's an inherent value in this, since there is a bit of public distrust in scientists for ideological and cultural reasons at the moment. And it also, now Sarah, where are you? You're still lurking around there. Sarah McLagan was one of the researchers whose projects was bandicoots on the urban fringes, is that right? Yeah, her project was one of them. It was also, we hoped very quietly, she doesn't know this, we really wanted to give up-and-coming young researchers media exposure and media experience. So, we threw Sarah into Kids WB TV, for example, and a whole host of other interviews. And that's building skills and communication, experience for an upcoming young generation of researchers. And Sarah and her colleagues did a fantastic job. Very quickly before we finish up, why would you do citizen science? Because Australia is enormous. We have huge areas to cover, and by involving people we can cover a great landmass and get people involved in the work that we're doing. Other examples are RedMap, which is the range extension database mapping marine species, and that, recreational fishers and scuba divers, they'll spot and photograph, say, fish, and say, oh, this is unusually far south, and it's showing, every time there's a photograph, it's visual, there's a media opportunity, there's a chance to say, the climate is changing, species distribution is changing, and to repeat that message again and again, but with a different picture that visualises it. There's also Melbourne Rainfall. Melbourne Water does rainfall monitors, and they're often retirees who just have a rainfall gauge in their backyard, so that makes it accessible. Whereas RedMap, you generally have people who are quite active, they go fishing, diving at the same spot at the same time each year. So their considerations to keep in the back of your mind is how accessible is it? Wildlife spotting is great because a person with a disability, or say a mother of a newborn breastfeeding at home, could pop online on an iPad and do those identifications. So it could bring that wildlife citizen science into someone's living room. In other cases, you want them there on the field, or in other cases, they're already there on the field because it's their farm. And the other final thing to keep in mind is that citizen science, I think there's an enormous future as long as we make sure we balance the need to equally value the citizen side, the public engagement, that it's meaningful and valuable and that people get a really good insight into the scientific process from it. And then the rigor side, that there are processes put up, that it's not just this token fluffy thing of people going, oh, there's some wildlife, can we trust their identification? That there is good checks and balances so that it's scientifically rigorous. Finally, I think my take-home message is that sustainability is a team sport. All of those examples I gave had involvement from private, public, universities, community groups, and that I think to meet the challenges that we need to, you've heard it earlier today, we need networks and strong stakeholder engagement. And finally, some useful resources. If the behaviour change theory and psychology interested you, there's a lot more of that at the Behaviour Works website. So they're a part of the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, and they have excellent resources and case studies of how you can understand the mindset behind what influences behaviour. There's the Australian Citizen Science Association, early days of their website, but it's getting there, but a really strong and supportive network. And they also have supported the Australian Citizen Science Project Finder, which you can look at different case studies of projects. And I'll leave it there for now.